In Montana's Glacier National Park, the rangers found 47 missing persons cases spanning 2 decades. All of them disappeared during winter storms. From the depths of my collection, the Nightmare Maestro brings you a tale that will make you question who's really watching when you think you're alone. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Ben Chapman stared at the manila envelope on his kitchen counter for 3 hours before finally opening it, though he'd known it was coming for months. The signature line at the bottom waited for him like an open grave, ready to swallow 15 years of marriage. His hand trembled as he reached for a pen, then stopped. Instead, he opened his laptop and booked a cabin in Glacier National Park, Montana, as far from Sacramento and Rebecca's lawyers as he could get. The listing described it as remote and peaceful, with photos showing a rustic wooden structure nestled among towering pines. Perfect. Ben needed remote. He needed peaceful. Most of all, he needed to be alone with his thoughts, away from the sympathetic glances of colleagues and the careful distance maintained by friends who didn't want to choose sides. The cabin's owner, a gruff-voiced man named Earl, warned him about the weather when confirming the booking. Winter storms could roll in without warning this time of year, he said. The nearest town was 30 miles away, and cell service was spotty at best. The local hunting season had just ended, but sometimes folks still came through tracking game. Ben assured him he understood the risks. What he didn't say was that isolation was exactly what he was looking for. The drive up took longer than expected. The rental car's tires struggled on the snow-packed Forest Service road, and twice Ben had to stop to consult his GPS. But as he crested the final ridge and saw the cabin through the trees, something in his chest loosened for the first time in months. No lawyers here, no passive-aggressive texts, no memories lurking in every room. Fresh snow had fallen recently, covering everything in pristine white. His boots crunched across it as he carried his bags inside, leaving a single trail of footprints from the car to the door. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a bedroom in the back. The windows looked out over an endless expanse of snow-covered forest, broken only by the distant peaks of the Rockies piercing the cloud cover like teeth. Ben built a fire, unpacked his supplies, and watched the sun set behind the mountains. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. The wind picked up, whistling through the trees and rattling the cabin's windows. But inside, it was warm and quiet. For the first time in months, Ben felt something like peace. He didn't notice the binoculars glinting from the tree line. Not yet. The first 2 days passed in a blur of hiking and solitude. Ben's world narrowed to simple rhythms: wake, eat, explore, sleep. He followed game trails through pristine forest, discovered frozen waterfalls that hung like glass daggers from cliff faces, and photographed the tracks of woodland creatures through fresh snow. His phone remained off, buried at the bottom of his backpack. The divorce papers sat unopened in his laptop bag. On the morning of the third day, he found the first anomaly. The previous evening's snowfall had erased all traces of his earlier excursions, leaving the landscape a blank canvas. But as Ben stepped onto the cabin's front porch with his morning coffee, he noticed something odd about the snow's surface. Boot prints, different from his own, formed a precise arc around the cabin's perimeter. They were deep, methodical impressions, not the random wandering of a lost hiker. These were the tracks of someone who had deliberately circled his cabin, studying it from every angle. Ben approached the nearest print, coffee forgotten and steaming in his hand. The tread pattern was military style, much like the boots he'd seen local hunters wearing at the general store when he'd stopped for supplies. As he crouched to examine it more closely, a sound caught his attention, the metallic click of a rifle bolt being worked, followed by absolute silence. The morning birds had stopped singing. The stillness felt wrong, predatory. The hairs on the back of Ben's neck rose as an involuntary shiver ran down his spine. He straightened slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. But as his eyes swept across the forest's edge, he caught a flash of something the morning sun reflecting off glass or metal, quickly withdrawn behind a tree. Earl's warning about hunters echoed in his mind. The sky to the northwest had taken on a peculiar greenish tinge, and the wind carried the metallic taste of approaching snow. Ben retreated inside, double-checking the locks before settling down to study the trail map. He'd planned a longer hike today, but something about those boot prints nagged at him. They seemed too purposeful, too strategic in their placement. As he traced possible routes with his finger, movement caught his eye through the window. A figure in winter camouflage stood at the forest's edge, motionless against the white backdrop. When Ben blinked, they stepped smoothly behind a tree. No stumbling, no hesitation, the movement was practiced, professional. These weren't random hunters who had strayed too far from their usual grounds. He spent the rest of the morning watching the sky darken and trying to convince himself there was an innocent explanation for what he'd seen. By noon, the first snowflakes began to fall. The storm hit with military precision, as if nature itself were conspiring with Ben's watchers. Within an hour, the gentle snowfall transformed into a tactical advantage for anyone who knew these mountains. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and the wind's howl would mask any approach. Ben had experienced blizzards before, but this was different. This was a hunter's storm. His phone showed no service, as expected. The satellite radio Earl had mentioned sat on a shelf, but it produced only static when Ben tried it. He wasn't worried, not yet. He had enough supplies for 2 weeks, plenty of firewood, and a generator if the power failed. But as the afternoon wore on, the temperature plummeted far below what the forecast had predicted. The first clear sighting came just before sunset. Through a momentary break in the storm, Ben spotted a figure moving with tactical efficiency between the trees. The person wore white winter camouflage, matching the environment perfectly. Their movements were precise, professional, the kind of skill that came from military training or years of hunting. They carried a high-powered rifle with a scope that could punch through the cabin's walls like paper. 20 minutes later, he saw another. Different height, same tactical gear, same methodical movement pattern. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs as he realized they were establishing positions around the cabin. He'd seen enough nature documentaries to recognize hunting behavior. They were setting up a kill zone. The rational explanations began to crumble. These weren't lost hunters or park rangers checking on his safety. The precision of their movements, the tactical positioning, the way they used the storm for cover, this was a coordinated operation. Ben found himself cataloging the cabin's vulnerabilities, the windows, the door's simple lock, the crawl space access he'd noticed under the back porch. As darkness fell, more figures appeared through the swirling snow. They moved like a well-trained unit, using hand signals to communicate. Ben counted at least 6 different individuals, each taking up strategic positions around the property. Their efficiency spoke of experience. How many times had they done this before? How many other isolated cabins had they surrounded? The generator failed just after sunset, plunging the cabin into darkness. Ben knew it couldn't be coincidence someone had gotten to the fuel line. In the beam of his flashlight, he caught glimpses of his hunters through the windows. They had night vision gear. The storm was their element, and they were tightening their noose with practiced patience. He'd stopped trying to convince himself this was a misunderstanding. The only question now was whether he'd survive until morning. Something about their movements nagged at Ben's tactical training from his 2 years in the Army Reserves. These weren't just hunters, their positioning was too precise, their patience too practiced. They moved like special forces operators, but no military unit hunted civilians in national parks. The realization hit him like a physical blow. These were people who had turned their combat skills toward darker purposes. His mind raced through the details he'd dismissed earlier. Earl's gruff voice warning about the weather and mentioning the hunting season. The convenient storm that had rolled in just as they made their move. The boot prints that showed they'd been studying the cabin long before he arrived. None of this was random. They had chosen him, guided him here like shepherds leading livestock to slaughter. A harsh click echoed through the darkness, the radio crackling to life. A familiar voice came through the static, Earl's gruff tones, but different now, stripped of their fake warmth. He explained the rules of their game with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Ben was their prey. If he survived until dawn, they would let him go. But no one ever did. Through the cabin's frosted windows, Ben watched his hunters' methodical preparations. Their hand signals and coordinated movements suggested ex-military background, probably special operations. They had turned their elite training into a twisted hobby, using the park's isolation to practice the most dangerous game. He found a note tucked into the satellite radio's manual, written in a shaky hand. They do this every winter. Dozens of us. They choose people no one will miss. Check the basement. Below it, a series of tally marks numbered 47. The implications crashed through Ben's mind. How many others had huddled in this cabin, reading this same note? How many had tried to survive the night? The basement door beckoned, but venturing down would leave him vulnerable. Yet the note's author must have discovered something important enough to risk writing it down. A sharp crack split the air, the sound of a rifle bolt being worked. It came from the direction of his car. They were eliminating his escape options systematically, professionally. Through the window, he saw one of them examining his rental car's engine with practiced efficiency. They had the training, the equipment, and the experience. All Ben had was his desperation and a dark mystery waiting in the basement. The basement door creaked open with the weight of 47 untold stories. Ben's flashlight beam revealed steep wooden stairs descending into darkness. Each step down felt like a surrender to gravity, to inevitability, to the growing certainty that he was walking into the Hunter's Museum. He wasn't wrong. The basement walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them, arranged in neat chronological order. Each showed a different person outside the cabin, all obviously taken with telephoto lenses without the subject's knowledge. Ben recognized the same vulnerability in their faces that he'd seen in his own mirror these past months. People running from something. Divorces, debts, legal troubles. The perfect prey, isolated, emotionally fragile, unlikely to be immediately missed. A corkboard dominated one wall, covered in maps of Glacier National Park marked with precise notations. Red pins showed cabin locations. Black pins marked what Ben realized with growing horror were kill sites. The tactical precision of it all, the carefully planned hunting grounds, the recorded statistics, the methodical documentation spoke of decades of refinement. He found their trophy collection next. Driver's licenses arranged by date, wedding rings, watches, personal effects cataloged with military efficiency. A logbook detailed each hunt with the sterile language of after-action reports. Time to incapacitation, distance of kill shots, weather conditions, lessons learned. Ben's hand shook as he read the most recent entries. The hunters were ex-Delta Force, using their training to orchestrate the perfect kills. They'd started with animals, graduated to hunting humans for private clients, and eventually turned it into their own elite sport. The cabin was their latest kill box, specially modified to their requirements. Every aspect of his booking had been monitored, his psychological profile analyzed. They'd chosen him weeks ago. The final display stopped his breath. Dozens of USB drives, each labeled with a date and name. With trembling fingers, Ben plugged one into his phone. Night vision footage filled the screen, a different cabin, a different victim, but the same methodical hunt. They recorded everything, studied their prey's reactions, learned from each kill. A floorboard creaked overhead. They were inside the cabin. The logbook's final entry was blank, except for a date to days and a single line. Subject displaying predictable behavior patterns, proceeding to final phase. They had known he would come down here. The stairs were a kill zone. The basement was a trap. and Ben had walked right into it, just as 47 others had before him. Training and instinct took over. As footsteps methodically descended the stairs, Ben slipped behind a storage shelf, using the hunter's own documentation as camouflage. The beam of a tactical flashlight swept the basement. 2 sets of boots reached the bottom step. They were clearing the room with textbook precision. The logbook had revealed their pattern. They toyed with their prey, herding them into prepared kill zones. Each hunt was choreographed like a military operation, with primary and secondary shooting positions pre-established. But their methodical efficiency was also a weakness. They were too practiced, too confident in their superiority. Ben waited until both hunters passed his position, then burst from cover. He drove his shoulder into the closer one, sending them both crashing into a wall of photographs. The second hunter's rifle swung around too late in close quarters. Their long-range weapons were a disadvantage. Ben didn't try to fight. He scrambled up the stairs as rounds punched through the wood behind him. The storm hit him like a physical wall as he burst from the cabin. The hunters had planned for this too. Their night vision equipment gave them a crucial advantage in the whiteout conditions. But Ben had studied their map. He knew the locations of their shooting positions, the carefully planned kill zones they'd established around the cabin. More figures emerged from the storm, moving with practiced coordination to cut off his escape routes. The crack of rifle bolts echoed through the wind as they established their firing lines. Ben could almost hear their tactical communications through their radio network, coordinating the final phase of their hunt. He ran. Through snow that tried to trap his feet. Through wind that scarred his face like glass. Through darkness alive with professional killers who had turned their military training into a blood sport. His lungs burned as the frigid air crystallized in his chest. Direction became meaningless. There was only a way away from the cabin that had become their latest killing ground. The hunters paced him through the trees, their movements precise and unhurried. They had done this so many times before. They knew the cold would slow him down, knew their superior equipment and training would prevail, knew that panic would eventually drive him toward one of their prepared ambush points. When Ben's legs finally gave out, he found himself exactly where their map had predicted, in a natural clearing that gave their snipers clear lines of fire from 3 different positions. As consciousness faded, he heard the familiar gruff voice of Earl through their radio network. Target has reached final position. All units prepare to execute. The search party found Ben Chapman's rental car 3 days later, buried under 4 feet of fresh snow. The cabin was immaculate, no signs of struggle, no bullet holes, no evidence of the horror that had unfolded. They discovered Ben's phone in the basement, its battery dead, but its memory card missing. The photographs, logbooks, and trophies were gone. Only his divorce papers remained, unsigned, on the kitchen table. The investigation revealed layers of calculated deception. The rental listing had been posted through an untraceable network of shell companies. Earl didn't exist. The phone number connected to a burner phone, now deactivated. The satellite radio had been modified to pick up only their private frequency. Every aspect of the trap had been engineered by professionals who knew how to erase their tracks, but they made one mistake. Ben's Army Reserve training hadn't just taught him tactics, it had taught him to recognize voices. In the basement, watching those USB recordings, he'd finally placed Earl's familiar gruff tone. 5 years ago, that same voice had been his commanding officer, teaching their unit advanced survival techniques. The man who had trained him had become one of the hunters. The pieces fit together with tactical precision. A hidden network of ex-military operators using their elite training to orchestrate the perfect hunt. They chose their targets carefully, people seeking isolation, running from personal crises. The cabin was their latest killing ground, but not their only one. Similar disappearances dotted the park's history, all during winter storms, all investigated by different jurisdictions that never connected the patterns. 2 weeks after Ben's disappearance, another listing appeared online. A different cabin, but the same promise of peaceful isolation. The property manager's voice, when he called to warn about winter storms, was familiar, not gruff this time, but Ben's own voice, perfectly mimicked from his recorded pleas. In the background, someone racked a rifle bolt. Their game had evolved. The newest hunt was about to begin, but this time, something was different. The rental request came from a woman whose search history showed research into missing persons cases in national parks. Her credit card trail revealed purchases of high-end surveillance equipment. The hunters didn't know they'd finally chosen someone who was hunting them. As snow began to fall over Glacier National Park, both predator and prey prepared for a different kind of game. The hunters were about to discover what it felt like to be watched. If you've ever felt watched while alone in nature, share your story in the comments below. But remember, not all predators stalk on four legs, and the most dangerous hunters are the ones who look just like us. Don't forget to subscribe to the Nightmare Maestro and hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss a chilling tale from humanity's darkest corners. After all, somewhere in America's vast wilderness, the game continues.